I always thought if I ever ended up on the news, it'd be for something stupid like tripping on live TV or accidentally setting my kitchen on fire. I didn't think it'd be because a stray cat bit me, and now I'm rotting from the inside out. That sounds dramatic, doesn't it? It's not. It's just the truth. I guess it started about a week ago, though honestly it's hard to tell anymore. Days have been blending together since the pandemic hit. Every day feels like a photocopy of the one before. Wake up, roll over, check the news, work from home, scroll social media, binge whatever's trending, repeat. If it weren't for the cat, I'd probably still be stuck in that loop. I first saw it when I went outside to take the trash to the curb. The neighborhood was eerily quiet. Not unusual lately, what with lockdowns and everyone trying to avoid each other like the plague, literally. But that morning, it felt different. There wasn't even the usual sound of dogs barking or kids playing in their yards. Just stillness. That's when I noticed it. The cat was sitting by the curb, near my trash can, staring at me. Its fur was patchy, matted in places, and its frame was painfully thin, like it hadn't eaten in days. But what really stood out were its eyes, piercing, glowing yellow, like twin pinpricks of light in its skull. I remember stopping mid-step, my breath catching in my throat. I don't know why, but those eyes didn't look like they belonged on an animal. They felt human. "Hey there, buddy," I said, my voice too loud in the silence. The cat didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring. It's not like me to approach strays. I've heard all the warnings about rabies and feral animals, but something about it made me stop. Maybe it was the way it looked at me, desperate and hollow, like it was asking for help. Or maybe it was just the sheer boredom of being locked inside for months, craving any kind of connection. Either way, I turned back to the house, grabbed a can of tuna from the pantry, and returned to the curb. "Here you go, little guy," I said, crouching down and popping the can open. That's when it happened. The cat lunged, faster than I thought possible for something so scrawny. Its teeth sank into the fleshy part of my hand, sharp and deep. I screamed, dropping the tuna as pain shot through me. The cat hissed, a low, guttural sound, then bolted down the street, disappearing around the corner. I stared at the wound, blood welling up around the puncture marks. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, cradling my hand. I headed back inside, rinsed it under the tap, and wrapped it in a bandage I found under the sink. It wasn't the first time I'd been bitten by an animal. When I was a kid, my neighbor's dog nipped me, and I had to get a tetanus shot. No big deal. This felt worse, though, like the bite was too deep, too violent for such a small animal. Still, I laughed it off. "Great, Alex," I said to myself, staring at the bandage. "Now you're so lonely you're getting attacked by stray cats." The rest of the day passed uneventfully, at least at first. I worked, ate, scrolled through TikTok, and tried to forget about the bite. But as evening rolled around, I started feeling off. It started with a dull ache in my hand, which wasn't surprising, given the bite. But by the time I sat down to watch TV, the ache had spread up my arm, a deep, throbbing pain that pulsed with every beat of my heart. I unwrapped the bandage to check it out and almost gagged. The bite was swollen, the skin around it inflamed and discolored. A faint purple-black tinge spread outward from the puncture marks, like ink bleeding into paper. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, reaching for my phone to Google infected cat bite. The search results weren't comforting. Rabies, cat scratch disease, septicemia. Fantastic. But as I scrolled, a headline caught my eye. "Mysterious virus linked 2 cats in Cleveland." Curious, I clicked on the article. It talked about an outbreak in a nearby city. People who'd been bitten or scratched by cats falling ill with flu-like symptoms. Some of them had gone to the hospital with fevers and hallucinations. A few were dead. Officials were dismissing it as a localized incident, but conspiracy theories were already taking off. I laughed nervously and closed the tab. Just fear-mongering, I told myself. The media loves a good panic. Besides, what were the odds I'd been bitten by one of these so-called infected cats? Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, I thought I heard something outside my bedroom window. A faint scratching noise like nails on glass. I froze, toothbrush halfway to my mouth. It was probably just the wind, I told myself, or maybe a tree branch. But then it came again, scratch, 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 insistent and deliberate. My pulse quickened. For a moment, I considered grabbing a baseball bat or calling the cops, but I shook my head. Don't be ridiculous, Alex. It's nothing. Still, I couldn't bring myself to look. Instead, I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a kid afraid of monsters under the bed. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I felt worse. Feverish, like I was coming down with the flu. My body ached, my throat was dry, and the bite on my hand looked even worse. The purple-black discoloration had spread farther, creeping up my wrist like a bruise and fast forward. I debated calling a doctor, but something held me back. Embarrassment, maybe, or denial. Whatever it was, I convinced myself I'd be fine. But the scratching came again that night. This time it was louder, more insistent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And this time, when I worked up the courage to peek through the curtain, the cat was there. Its yellow eyes glowed in the dark, fixed on me. But it wasn't just a cat anymore. Its body was bloated, patches of fur missing, skin sloughing off in places to reveal raw, pink flesh underneath. Its mouth hung open, drooling something thick and black. I stumbled back, heart pounding. When I looked again, it was gone. I told myself I was imagining things, that the fever was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. When I woke up the next morning, I wasn't sure if I was alive or already dead. The sheets under me were soaked through with sweat, the fabric clinging to my skin like I'd been swimming in them. My body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion, so deep it didn't make sense. My head throbbed, my mouth was so dry it felt like I'd swallowed a bucket of sand, and my heart was hammering in my chest as if I'd been running a marathon in my sleep. I groaned, rolling over, and that's when I noticed my hand. The bandage had soaked through in the night, the white gauze now stained a nauseating yellow-brown. When I peeled it back, I gagged. The skin around the bite was swollen and shiny, stretched tight like an overfilled water balloon. A thick, viscous pus was oozing from the punctures, dripping in slow, sticky globs onto my wrist. Holy shit, I whispered. I sat up, staring at the wound as if I could will it to look less disgusting. The skin wasn't just purple anymore. It was darkening, black veins spiderwebbing out from the bite like cracks in pavement. My hand was trembling, an involuntary twitch I couldn't control. This wasn't normal. For a moment, I considered calling an ambulance or rushing to the ER. But then reality hit me. It was a cat bite. A freaking cat bite. What was I supposed to say? That I got scratched by a stray, and now my hand looked like it belonged to a zombie? I could already picture the nurse rolling her eyes as she told me to calm down and slapped me with a bill I couldn't afford. I'd clean it, disinfect it, maybe take some painkillers. It'd be fine. That's what I told myself. Anyway, but as I staggered into the bathroom to rinse the wound, something fell off. Not just with my hand, but with me. When I turned on the tap, the sound of water hitting the sink was deafening, like a waterfall crashing right next to my ear. I winced, turning it down, and it was only then I realized I could hear the hum of the refrigerator all the way from the kitchen. I could even hear the faint creak of the neighbors' floorboards through the walls as they moved around their apartment. What the hell? I shook my head, trying to focus, but the strangeness didn't stop there. When I reached for a towel to dry my hand, I caught a whiff of something raw and metallic like iron. The smell was sharp, almost overwhelming, and it made my stomach churn. I followed the scent into the kitchen, where I found the source. A package of ground beef I'd forgotten to put in the freezer. Normally, the smell of spoiled meat would make me gag, but now it made my mouth water. I froze, horrified by the thought. What the hell was wrong with me? Shaking off the nausea, I grabbed my laptop and logged into work, desperate for a distraction. Of course, the first thing my coworker Greg said when my camera flicked on was, "Jesus, Alex, you look like shit. Good morning to you too," I muttered, trying to adjust the angle so I didn't look quite so pale. "No, seriously," he said, squinting at the screen. "You okay? You look sweaty. And like pale. Real pale." I waved him off. "I've fine. Just didn't sleep well." He said, clearly not buying it. "You don't have that cat flu thing, do you? You know, the zombie flu? The news is going nuts about it." My girlfriend won't even let me take out the trash without gloves on. Zombie flu. Greg laughed. Yeah, it's all over Reddit. Supposedly, some people who got bitten by cats started acting all weird and like losing their minds. They're calling it a pandemic now. Or trying to. Pretty sure it's all bullshit though. You know how people get with this stuff. I forced a laugh, but my stomach twisted. I'd seen the same stories, but I hadn't thought much of them. Until now. The rest of the workday passed in a haze. My hand wouldn't stop trembling, and the throbbing pain spread up my arm in rhythmic waves, like a second heartbeat. Every time I caught my reflection on the Zoom screen, I barely recognized myself. My skin was waxy and pale, my eyes sunken into my skull like I hadn't slept in days. Even my voice sounded strange, raspy and dry, like I'd been gargling gravel. Around noon, a breaking news alert flashed across my phone. Local woman found dead after erratic behavior. Feline virus suspected. I clicked on the article, my pulse quickening. The victim, a woman in her 30s, had been bitten by a stray cat 2 days prior. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises coming from her apartment, scratching, banging, even low growls, before she was found dead. The official cause of death was listed as self-harm, but the article hinted at something worse, something the authorities weren't ready to confirm. I felt sick. That night, the scratching came back. At first, it was faint, almost timid, like the sound of tree branches brushing against the window. But as the hours dragged on, it grew louder, more insistent. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I tried to ignore it, burying myself under the covers like a kid hiding from the boogeyman. But the sound wouldn't stop. Scratch, scratch, scratch. When I couldn't take it anymore, I threw the covers off and marched to the window. My heart was pounding, a mix of fear and anger as I yanked the curtain back, ready to scare off whatever was making that noise. And there it was, the cat. Its yellow eyes glowed like headlights in the dark, and its body. God, its body wasn't right. Its spine was arched at an impossible angle, its legs too long, its joints bending the wrong way. Patches of fur were missing, revealing raw, gray flesh that looked like it had been rotting for days. And its mouth hung open, unnaturally wide, drooling a thick, black fluid that dripped down onto the windowsill. It didn't run this time. It just stared. I stumbled back, heart hammering, my legs trembling so badly I could barely stand. The room spun around me, and my vision blurred. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the cat, its mouth curling into what almost looked like a smile. When I opened my eyes, I was on the floor. My mouth was dry, my head pounding like I'd been hit by a truck. The room swam in and out of focus as I pushed myself up, my hands slipping against something warm and sticky. Blood. I stared at my hands, the dark red smeared across my fingers, under my nails, and pooling on the hardwood floor. My stomach lurched while rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had no idea where the blood had come from, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I thought maybe it wasn't mine. That's when I noticed the door. The inside of my bedroom door was covered in scratches, long, deep gouges carved into the wood. The sight of it made my skin crawl. I crawled to my feet, swaying like I'd been drugged, and stumbled over to the door. My fingertips traced the jagged marks, my breath quickening. Had I done this? I couldn't remember anything after seeing the cat at the window. The memory cut off like a bad dream, fading into static, and then nothing. My hand trembled as I reached for the light switch, flicking it on. The mirror hanging on my closet door caught my eye, and I froze. At first, I didn't recognize myself. My reflection looked wrong. My skin was pale, almost gray, and a sheen of sweat clung to my face. Dark circles hung under my eyes, which were so bloodshot they looked like they'd been painted red. My lips were cracked, my hair plastered to my forehead. And my teeth. I leaned closer to the mirror, my heart racing. My teeth weren't normal. The canines were longer, sharper, almost predatory. My gums throbbed, as if the teeth were pushing their way further out. I opened my mouth to touch them, but jerked my hand back when I saw the dried blood crusted around my lips. No, 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 no. This couldn't be happening. My stomach growled violently, doubling me over with hunger, so sharp it felt like I was being gutted. I stumbled into the kitchen, yanking open the fridge, desperate to find something, anything, to make it stop. Leftover pizza, yogurt, apples, a block of cheese. None of it appealed to me. Just the smell of it made my stomach twist. Then I saw the package of ground beef. It was still sitting on the counter where I'd left it the day before, the plastic wrapping bloated with air. The meat had turned a dull brown, flecked with gray, and the smell was overwhelming. A mixture of iron and decay that should have made me gag. But instead, I wanted it. No, not wanted. Needed. I tore the plastic open with shaking hands, grabbing a handful of the raw meat. My brain screamed at me to stop, to throw it away, but my body didn't listen. I shoved the meat into my mouth, the cold, slimy texture sliding down my throat as I chewed frantically. It tasted awful, rancid and metallic, but I couldn't stop. I gagged, tears streaming down my face, but I kept eating. When the package was empty, I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, panting. My stomach still growled, unsatisfied, but at least the stabbing pain had dulled to a low ache. What the hell was wrong with me? The TV in the living room was still on, the volume low, but a breaking news banner caught my eye. Viral outbreak spreads to major cities. Government declares martial law. I crawled over to the couch, grabbing the remote to turn up the volume. The news anchor's voice was strained, their face pale as they delivered the report. Officials are now confirming that the virus, initially thought to be spread through feline bites or scratches, has begun to transmit between humans. Victims report flu-like symptoms, followed by severe aggression and erratic behavior. Infected individuals have been seen attacking others in what witnesses describe as animalistic assaults. Authorities are urging citizens to stay indoors and avoid contact with anyone exhibiting symptoms. The screen cut to shaky cell phone footage of a man staggering down a city street. His skin was gray, his clothes torn, and his mouth was covered in blood. He lunged at a woman passing by, tackling her to the ground as the camera jerked away. Screams filled the air before the video cut out. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was happening. Whatever this thing was, this virus, it was spreading fast. And I was part of it. My hands gripped the couch cushion tightly, the fabric tearing under my nails. I forced myself to let go, breathing hard, but the sound of my own heartbeat filled my ears. It wasn't just my heartbeat, though. I could hear other heartbeats. I could hear the upstairs neighbor pacing back and forth in their apartment. I could hear the faint murmur of their voice, their blood pumping as they moved. I could hear the family next door, the rhythmic pulse of their lives beating in sync. And I could smell them. The scent was faint but intoxicating, a mixture of salt and iron that made my mouth water. My stomach growled again, and I doubled over, clutching my sides. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, no, no. This isn't happening. This isn't real." A soft rustling sound made me freeze. It was coming from the hallway. I turned slowly, my blood running cold. The cat was back. It was sitting in the middle of my apartment, staring at me with those glowing yellow eyes. Its body looked worse than before, bloated, twisted, and slick with what looked like black, rotting flesh. The stench of it filled the room, making my stomach turn. "How did you get in here?" I whispered. My voice was shaky, barely audible. The cat didn't move. It just watched me, unblinking. I stumbled toward it, my legs trembling beneath me. But as soon as I got close, it darted into the shadows, disappearing into the corner of the room. I followed, my breath hitching, but when I reached the corner, it was gone. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, and I dropped to my knees, gagging. The bile that rose in my throat was thick and black, splattering onto the floor as I retched. The smell of it was unbearable, like death and decay, and tears streamed down my face as I vomited again. When it was over, I collapsed onto the floor, my body shaking. The last thing I saw before my vision went black was the cat's yellow eyes watching me from the shadows. When I woke up, I couldn't move. My body felt like it was betraying me, every joint stiff and screaming with pain. My skin was damp, clammy, and when I ran a hand across my face, my fingers came away coated in something slick and oily. My hand? Oh God, my hand. The fingernails were black. Not just dirty or bruised, black and brittle and cracked like burnt wood. One of them had already fallen off in the night, leaving a raw, oozing crater in its place. The others were hanging on by threads of tissue. I stared in horror as I flexed my fingers, the nails shifting unnaturally, threatening to detach. My teeth felt loose too. Every time I clenched my jaw, I could feel them wobble, tiny pinpricks of pain radiating from my gums. I reached into my mouth to touch one of my canines and nearly fainted when it shifted under the pressure, like a baby tooth ready to fall out. No, 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 I whispered, my voice cracking. I staggered to my feet, nearly collapsing as my legs jerked awkwardly beneath me. They didn't bend the way they should have. My knees buckled inward, my feet dragging across the floor like I was a puppet with its strings cut. Every movement felt wrong, disjointed, like my body was no longer mine. I needed help. I stumbled toward my phone, which was still lying on the couch, and dialed 911. My hands trembled so violently that it took me 3 tries to hit the buttons correctly. When the call connected, I tried to speak, but the sound that came out of my throat wasn't human. It was a guttural growl, low and raspy, like the noise I'd heard the cat make outside my window. No, I choked out, but it didn't sound like me. My words were slurred, garbled, almost animalistic. H, help me. Hello? This is 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice sounded distant, like I was hearing it from underwater. I opened my mouth to speak again, but all that came out was another deep, rumbling growl. I slammed the phone down, panic clawing at my chest. I couldn't talk. I couldn't think. I stumbled into the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink to steady myself. The mirror was cracked. When had that happened? But it was still enough for me to see what I had become. My skin was worse now, pale and rubbery, with a strange, almost translucent quality. Black veins ran beneath the surface, branching out like rivers on a map. My hair hung in clumps, greasy and tangled, and my eyes, they weren't mine anymore. The whites of my eyes had turned yellow, the irises glowing faintly, like the cat's. I pressed my palms to my face, shaking my head violently, as if I could wake myself up from this nightmare. And that's when the memories started. They came all at once, vivid and sharp, like a knife slicing through my skull. Flashes of moments I hadn't thought about in years. The time I threw rocks at the neighbor's dog for barking too much. The time I caught a frog in the backyard and crushed it under my shoe, just to see what would happen. The time I ignored a stray cat limping in the rain, too absorbed in my phone to care. Each memory hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. They weren't just memories, they were feelings. I could feel the dog's confusion, the frog's fear, the cat's pain. It was like the virus was forcing me to relive my guilt, making me see the cruelty I'd buried deep inside myself. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry, but the memories didn't stop. The scratching came again, this time from inside my apartment. I turned, and there it was, the cat. It was sitting in the doorway, watching me with those glowing yellow eyes. Its body was even worse now, bloated and rotting, patches of skin sloughing off to reveal slick muscle beneath. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just watched. I can't do this, I whispered, backing away. The cat blinked slowly, then turned and walked out of the apartment. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let this thing ruin me. If it wanted me to follow, then fine. I'd follow it. I'd end this, one way or another. I threw on a hoodie to cover my decaying skin and stumbled out the door, my legs still jerking awkwardly with every step. The cat moved quickly, darting through alleyways and across empty streets. The city was a ghost town. Most people were either hiding or already infected. The cat led me to an abandoned building on the edge of town. The windows were shattered, the walls covered in graffiti, the air thick with the stench of rot. I hesitated at the entrance, but the cat disappeared inside, and I couldn't stop myself from following. The inside was worse than I imagined. Dozens of cats were gathered in the darkness, their glowing yellow eyes reflecting the dim light. They were all infected, their bodies twisted and decaying but still alive. They moved unnaturally, twitching and jerking as they circled something in the center of the room. Someone was standing there. No, not standing. Looming. It was a man, or at least it had been. His body was almost unrecognizable, bloated and discolored, his skin sloughing off in sheets. His arms were too long, his fingers ending in jagged claws. His face was a nightmare, his mouth stretched into a permanent grin, his teeth jagged and sharp. When he spoke, his voice was deep and guttural, barely human. "You'll understand soon," he said, his glowing eyes locking onto mine. With the next step, I turned and ran. I didn't make it far. The world spun around me, my legs giving out as I collapsed onto the pavement outside. My body convulsed violently, every muscle seizing at once. I screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't a scream. It was a growl, deep and animalistic. My vision flickered, my mind fracturing as the hunger surged inside me, consuming everything else. I wasn't Alex anymore. Not really. When I woke up, I was in my bed. For a moment, I thought it was over, that everything I'd been through was some feverish nightmare, the kind that sticks with you for a few seconds before dissolving into nothing. The room looked normal. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air, and the distant hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. But then I moved. My limbs felt wrong, heavy, uncoordinated, like they didn't belong to me anymore. I sat up, every muscle in my body groaning in protest, and that's when I saw the scratches. Deep, jagged claw marks tore through the headboard above my bed, which splintered and cracked. My hands shook as I reached for the blanket, throwing it off me, and that's when I noticed my arms. My skin wasn't skin anymore. It was a sickly, greenish gray, the texture rubbery and taut. Black veins snaked beneath the surface, pulsing faintly, like something alive was crawling just beneath the flesh. My fingernails, or what was left of them, were cracked and yellowed, jagged edges glinting in the sunlight. No. I stumbled to the bathroom, nearly falling as my legs jerked awkwardly beneath me. My reflection in the mirror stopped me cold. I wasn't human anymore. My eyes glowed a piercing, unnatural yellow, the whites completely consumed by the same golden hue as the cat's. My mouth hung open, revealing rows of jagged teeth, too sharp and too large for my jaw. My hair clung to my scalp in greasy clumps, patches of it missing entirely, exposing raw, discolored skin. I reached up to touch my face, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. The sensation was muted, like there was a layer of rubber between my skin and the nerves beneath. I pressed harder, and a piece of my cheek sloughed off, falling into the sink with a wet plop. "Oh God!" I croaked, my voice guttural and low, barely resembling the person I used to be. I staggered back into the bedroom, my mind racing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But every time I looked down at my hands, my claws, I couldn't deny it. I was a monster, and yet I was still me. My thoughts, my memories, my feelings, they were all still intact, trapped in this rotting shell of a body. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rip myself apart, but my body wouldn't obey me anymore. That's when I noticed it. The dog, my neighbor's golden retriever, Cooper, was sitting outside my window, his leash tied to the railing. He was chewing on a stick, completely oblivious to the abomination watching him from the other side of the glass. And I was watching him. No, not watching. Stalking. My body moved on its own, my hands gripping the edge of the windowsill as I leaned forward. I could hear Cooper's heartbeat, the steady thump, thump, thump pounding in my ears. I could smell him warm, salty, alive. My mouth watered, and before I even realized it, I was growling. "Stop!" I hissed to myself, forcing my body to step back. "Stop it!" But the hunger didn't stop. It clawed at my insides, an unbearable, insatiable ache that demanded to be fed. I clenched my fists, digging my jagged nails into my palms until black ichor oozed from the wounds. The pain was dull, distant, like it belonged to someone else. In a moment of desperation, of lucidity, I grabbed my laptop. My hands fumbled over the keyboard, the claws making it nearly impossible to type. But I forced myself to write this. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. It means the virus has won. You have to understand, I didn't want this. I didn't ask for any of this. I tried to fight it, but it's too strong. It's in my head, in my body, in my soul. The hunger is consuming everything, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The scratching at my door pulled me out of my thoughts. Knock, knock. Alex? Are you okay in there? It was my neighbor, the one who owned Cooper. Her voice was soft, concerned, the kind of tone you use when you're worried about someone but don't want to upset them. I wanted to tell her to leave, to run, but when I opened my mouth, all that came out was a guttural snarl. Alex, she said again, louder this time. I could hear the doorknob turning. I've been worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone. I tried to scream, but the word came out as a low, guttural growl. My body moved on its own, staggering toward the door as my mind screamed for it to stop. The door creaked open. She gasped. Oh my God! I lunged. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, her terrified scream, the taste of blood, the wet sound of flesh tearing, and then silence. When I came to, the room was covered in blood. It was splattered on the walls, pooling on the floor, dripping from my hands. My neighbor's body was crumpled in the doorway, her lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. And on my shoulder, perched like a king on its throne, was the cat. Its yellow eyes glowed brighter than ever, and as I looked at it, I felt something shift inside me. The hunger faded, replaced by a cold, empty stillness. I wasn't in control anymore. I never had been. The cat let out a low, guttural purr, its claws digging into my rotting flesh. And that's when I understood. This virus, it wasn't just about infection. It wasn't just about turning people into monsters. The cats were the ones in control. They weren't just carriers. They were puppeteers, pulling the strings of their infected hosts, using us to spread the disease further. I wasn't me anymore. I was theirs. The worst part isn't that I'm a monster. The worst part is that I can still think, still scream, while it uses my body to hunt. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.